Welcome back to Retro Rebound. Today we're making a video that can absolutely age horribly with the impending release of Pokemon Legends Arceus. But I wanted to make it anyway, because recently we got Pokemon Shining Pearl, and I had a revelation while playing it that I wanted to share with the audience because I thought it would be perfect for this channel and a good platform to get some people talking about Pokemon needs to change. As a formula, it needs to evolve. Normally, we don't do critical pieces here on Retro Rebound. I saved that for Mr. Matty Plays. But I felt with the retro theme here, it was a great platform to get the conversation started. So what do I mean by all of this? Well, as always, I like to begin things with a little bit of a story. I pick up Pokemon Shining Pearl. This is the brand new remake that came out. They remade Pearl, they remade Diamond. It's got the new art style. It's a one-to-one remake in the best sense and the worst sense is kind of the general consensus, which means you're getting a lot of things that sucked about the game back then, and you're getting a lot of good things about the game back then. The music is warm, comforting, and inviting. The art style is beautiful, although different. There's not many quality of life enhancements there, so there's some moments that you kind of roll your eyes at the game. And then there's the combat, which has remained stagnant for a long while. And it was as I was in just my mere first hour of this game, taking a complete nostalgia dive, that I just snapped out of it and went, I don't like this anymore. And it's not because I have outgrown Pokemon, which I know is a series that targets a younger audience. It's because it's refused to evolve. Pokemon is one of those very rare series that is absolutely able to capture an audience both young and older. We've seen as much in the manga when they tackle much more mature themes and the death of Pokemon even, to the games, which of course are a little bit more kid-friendly. And there's no issue with that. But Pokemon, as a lot of us who watch this channel, we grew up with it. So what went from, I would say, just like with Fable, baby's first RPG, it is now transformed into many of us in our mid-20s, early 30s, into video game comfort food. Because it brings us back to a particular time in our lives where things were simple. You'd fire up Pokemon, life was great, you had your Lunchables to your side, and you didn't have to worry about anything. And so now it's a transport to a different time period, and Nintendo, as well as the Pokemon Company, have really leaned on that a lot, trusting that their audience is going to continue to dive into nostalgia. And so as I was playing Shining Pearl, I just realized they need to do more. I want to talk about that because they used to do more. And that's what I loved about Pokemon so much. So you can kind of toss the remake to the side and go, it's a remake of an older game. It's good that they were faithful. And I know I'm not going to win a lot of fans this way. But I look at something like Pokemon Sword and Shield, which was a brand new mainline series that I know has been ripped to shreds up and down across the internet between the models from the 3DS version being brought into the Switch version and all the different lies on a technical level that Game Freak had done and how they were stretched thin because they only had 100 people working on the game. Just tons of stuff that should not be happening for what is the highest grossing property. Yes, really, highest grossing property on planet Earth. It should not be occurring, but it did. And when you look at this mainline Pokemon game and you think to yourself, this is what happens when you bring it to a hybrid console, that's where it really started for me. But I thought with Shining Pearl, I could override my own criticism and go, it's nostalgia, it's okay. But now, desperate times, desperate measures. Let's go through a little bit of the Pokemon collection and highlight what I mean by they used to actually experiment. So there were weird ones, for sure, that aren't going to generate much audience interest, like Pokemon Dash. I picked this one up because it was 20 bucks. Everything Pokemon goes up in value. So I was like, yep, this will be worth something someday. It's definitely gone up in value. As you can see, all of these will be complete in box. But there are weird ones like Pokemon Dash, which I get. They sort of done away with those. They've moved on from them. You see ones nowadays like Pokemon Unite, which is this MOBA style Pokemon game that I like a lot on the gameplay front. But much like a lot of piss poor free-to-play games, the monetization model is terrible. And in the case of Pokemon Unite, it's like something out of a mobile game from 2013 where we're seeing pay-to-win microtransactions all over the place. And it's completely destabilized the balance of the game. And it's this back and forth between what they once did and what they do now. That's their new form of experimentation, this safety net that's required for, again, the highest grossing property on planet Earth. And then I look at something like this one here, which really gets down to my main point. I look at Pokemon Conquest. A lot of people probably haven't heard of this game. It came out in 2012. It was a late DS title. And there was a lot more happening at this point in time, right? Think of games that were coming out around 2011, 2012, Skyrim, you had GTA, Max Payne. Like there were so many different things coming up or coming out that no one was really talking about this Pokemon spinoff. But this was a Pokemon spinoff that had 6-on-6 turn-based tactic styles battles. It was based in Nobunaga's ambition, right? So you kind of take this character that I'd imagine gamers out there are very familiar with in, say, Dynasty Warriors, Samurai Warriors. And what you would do is build your own army by recruiting warriors and Pokemon. That's different. That's fun experimentation. And they don't do things like this anymore. They just don't, when they really should be, because that's what grew the IP in the first place, was not because they kept rinsing and repeating two versions of the same mainline game for generations because we were too young to give a damn. It's because they did things like this. They did things like Pokemon Conquest that were really different. And it goes deeper than that. You get things like the DS screen destructor itself, Pokemon Ranger. Pokemon Ranger was a game that over time told a pretty compelling tale. And it was in this series that you started to learn beyond some small elements in the main game. Like I think of Cubone's Graveyard and that whole story in Lavender Town where you get a peek at the darkness in Pokemon. But I feel like with Ranger, you start to see a little bit more of what I would personally call maturity, right? For the audience who was getting older with the series. Not too old, but just growing up with it. And where I really feel like they did a great 180 of their own license, saying like, hey, this is pretty much the same thing, but we're doing some different things, is with the Mystery Dungeon series. So we've got Pokemon Super Mystery Dungeon here, and we've got Pokemon Mystery Dungeon Blue Rescue Team here, and there was Red Rescue Team. They did a remake of this one on Switch now, and then they have Super Mystery Dungeon, which I believe has been the last one, and this game story is insane. That's what was so good about Super Mystery Dungeon, is because it felt like Pokemon was making it for folks like myself when I was in my teens, you know? You wanted a little bit more agency, so you did the personality test at the beginning, and when you did that personality test, you got a different Pokemon, so your build was different, and there was choices in the game like that. And then you get to, especially if you've played Super Mystery Dungeon, you know what I'm talking about. Second half of this story, insane. It's dark. It's actually legitimately dark, and you're like, whoa, that is surprising. But you don't see that anymore. And the reason is, I think, because you get things like these nowadays, which sell by the millions. And yeah, I get it. Guilty as charged. I'm literally holding the copy right in my hand. I bought it. But as you can see, throughout a collection of these experiences, you've got a lot of games here that all did a lot of different things. But now you get a MOBA, which is pay to win. You get a remake of Blue Rescue Team. You don't get things like Conquest anymore. You don't get things like Pokemon XD Gale of Darkness. You don't get games like these, which had this massive brand new adventure that when you went from Game Boy all the way to the GameCube, it was night and day. Was the combat the exact same? Yes. But there was a different feeling in world exploration. And I know not everyone's in love with this game. I get it. But I'm just saying, there was a time they were doing something different. And because people constantly make excuses for Pokemon, I think a lot of that's been lost on people. And so what they do now is they go back to the well. Just like they did with the remakes of Pokemon Mystery Dungeon, just like they did with the remake recently of Pokemon Pearl, they go back to the well for their spin-offs. So they give you Pokemon Snap, new Pokemon Snap. And it's still a game that's on rails. It's beautiful, don't get me wrong, but it's still on rails. And I buy these games out of pure fascination now. Just to see when I put my money out on the line, which I'm lucky to do this for a living, but when I put my money out on the line, what do I really get for $60? And in this case, a lot of people liked in the 90s Pokemon Snap, which I get, right? I always jokingly slander Pokemon Snap because I'm like, oh, you're just taking pictures. It's all in good fun, right? Because in the 90s, I could see how it's cool. You have these pixel-based Game Boy games, and then you move on into 3D models and exploring and seeing Pokemon interact with each other. Very novel for its time. But it's 2021, and this thing rolls out, and it's pretty much the same thing in a lot of ways. And people are fine with it. And in one way, it's like, am I wrong for telling them to expect more from, again, the highest grossing series on planet Earth? I guess maybe. Who am I to say you're wrong for enjoying things? Because I'm definitely not. But I can't believe there isn't more of a demand that this series evolves, because you have so many spin-offs that I've just shown and plenty more that I don't even own yet that display clear as day that there was a time that Pokemon was ambitious and tried new things. They didn't just go back to the well with this and remakes. They weren't one of these, I don't know how else to word it, piss poor franchises that was trying to find relevance and make any dime they could until they could get to that big title. They have the money to do it now. They have the money to experiment, but they just don't. And those new ideas don't even have to come in the form of spin-offs. That's one thing that can be easily forgotten in this conversation. Something like Shining Pearl could be a great platform for experimentation for newer entries in the series. Just like we saw in Let's Go, was it kind of weird that there weren't any random battles with Pokemon you'd find in the world? Instead, you were using like your motion controls to throw Pokeballs? Yeah, it was different. Good. It was different. I kind of like that about Pokemon Let's Go. They tried something a little bit different that shook up the formula. Was it still the same back and forth combat? Yes. But these could be a platform to try something new if you don't want to risk it all with your mainline series, which they should be, by the way. But they don't. So then, of course, I got to get into combat. Combat in Pokemon, when you play any remotely modern turn-based game, it's insane that this series is like the lead of the pack for a lot of people. The strategic elements are so bare bones and thin. The pacing of combat. What would I do personally to make it better? Add some more Pokemon into the mix, like those tag battles. Make them more interactive with like passing turns and buffing each other more. And make it beyond just weakness targeting. And this very slow seesaw type of battle where you're just going back and forth with one another. There is a predictability in this turn-based combat system. And turn-based isn't supposed to be predictive. It's supposed to be reactive, if anything. Like something happens and you're like, what can I do about this with my tool set? This game is just like, yep, this is water. Let me bring in the leaf Pokemon. Leaf moves, super critical, super effective. One shot, one kill. Okay, who's next? This Pokemon's coming in. Oh, it's this one. All right, let's bring in the water guy now. It's so rinse and repeat. And it's so stuck in its ways that it's baffling to me that people, again, just lie down and want to accept it. And again, I think it's because of a generational comfort that's existing there. So between the mechanics in the game and the lack of experimentation, I'm really bothered where Pokemon lies right now, because it needs to change. It needs to evolve, because I imagine I'll be one of the few saying something right now, and that's okay. But I think as the years carry on, this video will actually age well. But I think immediately when Legends Arceus comes out and people are like, look at the open hub areas and stuff, yeah, it could look pretty bad. And we'll be talking about Legends Arceus here on this channel, as well as Mr. Matty Plays, of course. I'm very curious about that one, because I come from the standpoint of someone who loves Pokemon. I have not outgrown it. I've just outgrown their same tried and true formula, which I would with anything I love in this world, because it's the same thing constantly. Variety is the spice of life for a reason. It could be even Knights of the Old Republic. It doesn't matter if they're constantly doing the same thing. It's time to evolve. It's time to change just a little bit. Just a little bit. And this also hasn't even mentioned anything to do with Nintendo's current standing series. Look at Metroid. Look at Zelda. Look at Mario. And like, I have some issues with how Nintendo treats their audience and even how they treat some of their series. Like Super Mario 3D All-Stars is a joke, right? The way they presented what is their crown jewel of games, the fact that they handled that way and the ports were so lazy, I don't like that. But when I look at something like Super Mario Odyssey, when I look at Breath of the Wild, there is an evolution per generation for their flagship IP. But look at Pokemon. And be honest with yourselves, even if you're a super fan watching this, can you well and truly say the same thing for this series? You can't. You would be lying to yourself if you said that Pokemon generationally has moved at the same pace as all these others. It was significant when you could put clothing on your character in Pokemon. the series that let you customize your character and name yourself in the first place. It was significant when in, I think, X and Y, you could change your clothes. It's sad because acceptance is a large part of this. Just accepting what they hand us. And it's the hopelessness attached to it, thanks to Nintendo, of they're going to do fine anyway. What do they care? So you just have to hope that the creatives get enough spark to do something new, right? I look at something like Digimon Survive and then Digimon Cyber Sleuth. Like, you have a turn-based RPG there, and you got a tactics-based, gritty, visual novel Digimon game in Digimon Survive. And granted, Digimon Survive's not out yet. Maybe it's horrible. But I love to see new things being tried. And I'm a nostalgia guy. There's a reason this channel exists. There's nothing wrong with keeping old elements, familiar elements. But there's a point where it's got to change. And hopefully Legends Arceus well and truly is that. But I don't know how much faith I can hold in these teams anymore. Especially when I look at what happened with Pokemon Sword and Shield. This is your main grossing IP and you have 100+ people on this. This should be a multi-hundred talent, nose to the grindstone type of production for these games to deliver the best of the best, the lead of the pack. And it's not. It's a cash cow. And I hate that it's really devolved into that rather than evolved. So I could rant for much longer, but I think I've got my point across on where I stand with Pokemon, what needs to change, and what's wrong with it nowadays. And hopefully some of you out there found this somewhat eye-opening, and do consider sharing this around if you found it particularly telling on where Pokemon stands, because it's something that I'm really passionate about. I mean, look, I got right here. Look at my Game Boy Advance SP. Come on. Like, I love this series, man. It deserves so much better. So fingers crossed that they figure something out with it, or Legends Arceus just reinvents the wheel more than I'm personally expecting. So with that, take excellent care of yourselves. I'm looking forward to seeing your feedback on this one, and peace out.